This video is all about making your perfect sourdough starter, in this case for pizza. Something I've never done before either.
So there's many reasons why you might like sourdough pizza. So for instance, the flavor can be part of it, and actually it's not that overly sour. And that happens because during the fermentation you get a production of organic acids. So it also means the longer that you leave it, the more sour the taste will become. So it depends on what your preference is food-wise, but it might also depend on how much patience you have. But besides that increase in flavor, it's also easier to digest, so because of that longer fermentation process. And then finally, it can also get like a little bit more crispy, so the texture actually can differ quite a bit.
So let's have a look at the recipe. Sourdough is a ferment of yeast and bacteria that naturally exist in flour. So here we have a dried starter culture, and what we actually need to do is 3 different steps. So we've got to activate it, and we make production sourdough, make some different batches, and then finally we just need to eat it. So let's have a go and see how long this actually takes. So this is day 1. So I've got a little bit of lukewarm water, and then we're just going to pour this in. So how do you know if it's active? So if you remember, when we have yeast, when it's actually metabolically active, it produces carbon dioxide, so you would see some bubbling. Also, it might smell a little bit. So now we need to fully activate it. So you might be able to see that I've added a little bit more warm water. And the next step is to add the flour, mix it a bit. And now we need to wait for at least 8 hours. So let's see what happens after this. So we're going to leave it at slightly elevated temperature. So let's say 25 to 35 degrees in order to activate it. The bubbles are actually being formed. So you can see that the yeast is proliferating because carbon dioxide is produced. So now the sourdough has been activated. So the next step is to actually make a production batch. So I said before, it's bubbly and it definitely smells somewhat. Now we need to make a production batch. So here's some more wheat flour, to which I will add some water, which is slightly warm, so kind of lukewarm again. And we're going to mix all of that together to get some kind of lumpy consistency. And then we have to wait again. So I got something now which is fairly consistent, a little bit like a very thick porridge. And again, here we now need to wait, and I'm going to put this in the fridge again overnight. So let's see what happens tomorrow. So what I haven't shown here is that when you actually proof the dough, so you normally do it as a ball, and that's because when it proofs it kind of relaxes towards the outside, you get that perfect circle formation, and then it's much easier to get it like into a flat shape as shown here. And there's multiple ways of how you can do this by hand, but in this case I thought it was easier just to do it with a mixer. So there are lots of recipes you can try out there, and I used about 10 to 20% of the starter, just following a standard recipe that basically came with the sachet. So here you can see the end result. I went just quite basic with the pizza. What I did is when you kind of level it out with a fork, I made some extra holes to increase the surface area, which you do with a standard pizza as well. A little bit of pizza sauce, some mozzarella, and then some vegetables and fresh basil on top. So the end result for a first attempt is definitely not bad, but obviously I think it would have been better in my case if the dough was not quite as thick as I used it for. But what I did really learn in this process, it's not that difficult to do. It might be quite time consuming, so this definitely takes a lot longer than I'm used to. But if you do it in big batches, you can easily store this dough, for instance, in the freezer or in the fridge, and just get it out whenever you want. So when you work with a sourdough starter, unlike with like normal yeast, where I didn't really see very obviously that the yeast is active, in the sourdough starter that was pretty obvious, and there was much more smell involved, and you could clearly see it bubbling. So I learned a little bit more about the yeast metabolic process that's involved, and how you actually get that sour and nice flavor into your pizza. So do check out this playlist, Science of Everyday Things, if you're interested in other topics, such as for instance the science of baking, and some small science experiments you can try at home. Thanks for watching.